Hello, modern drummer. I'm David Frangioni. We are here live backstage in Miami Beach with Chris Maas. Chris, great to see you.
Great to see you, David.
On tour with Sting. Sting 3.0 is the proper band name, right?
Yeah.
It's an awesome band. I can't wait for you guys to check this out. But your journey to get to this point, obviously playing with Sting is a career highlight for any musician. But there's been a lot of highlights through your career, and you've played with some amazing artists. Let's start at the beginning. How do you find the drums?
I found the drums through my dad. My dad was a very passionate drummer, not professionally, but purely for fun. On weekends, he would play with a brass band. He was the drummer in a brass band back in Luxembourg, where I grew up, and he sometimes would bring home the kit from the rehearsal studio and set it up for me in the garage, and then he would teach me a few rudiments or a couple of grooves, and I would just sit there over the course of the weekend, and then
Father and son bonding.
Yes, very much.
And how old were you at this point?
So I would have been probably 4 or 5.
Oh, really? Yeah, you're a baby, basically.
Yeah,
okay,
very
but he's kind of turning you on to the drums.
Absolutely.
Because he loved it so much.
Yeah.
And you clearly took to it, or were you a little resilient at first? A little reluctant at first.
I always wanted to be like my dad. So seeing my dad play, my mum would take me to performances that my dad would do. These aren't big shows or anything, but they were sort of small gigs around the country, and we would go and see my dad play.
But he was playing a proper kit.
He was playing a proper drum set. Yeah. Eventually, he took me to rehearsals a few times, and when the band took a break, he would put me on the kit, and I was able to, I wasn't actually able to touch the pedals yet, but I would, grab a pair of sticks and just go around, and then the whole, the classic story of pots and pans at my grandma's house, and all of that is a part of the journey that eventually led me to my dad buying me a used kit when I was 10. He surprised me with a drum kit for my birthday.
Wow,
and
that's huge.
Yeah, and I still have that kit. And
is it still in Luxembourg?
Yes. It's
it sounds like you and your dad were close.
Yes, we're still very, very close. He was really my original inspiration that brought me to the instrument, and remains even though he said he would stop playing the day he felt like my playing would surpass his, he would stop playing and only dedicate his time to getting me to gigs, and he would drive me to shows, and he did that by the time I was 14. We used to play together. My kit was set up in his office at home, and we had this small room that had a drum kit and a desk facing each other. So he would he was
so supportive.
Yeah, incredible. And both my parents, I really owe everything to them. When later on, when I moved to London, I finished my studies. My dad paid for lessons, from a very early age, and I was very fortunate to, have lessons and learn harmony and theory, and then I went to I enrolled at the conservatory, jazz conservatory in Luxembourg, and I finished my studies there in 2005, and then I moved to London, which again, thanks to the first couple of years at least, it was because of my parents that I was able to do that.
And they're of modest means, right? So this is a big deal to help you like
Absolutely.
that.
So my dad at that time actually had 2 jobs. My mum was working full time as well. And I even, the last couple of years while I was still in high school, I was doing work on the side. I was working as a mechanic on weekends, and then in the year leading up to me moving to London, I was going full time as that mechanic, And then I was just saving up as much money as I could in order to make that move to
and having
London.
to practice.
Yes.
Right? So you have
absolutely.
practice, you have
Yeah.
school, and you're a mechanic.
Yes.
Plus
yeah,
your mom's
yeah.
working full time, plus your dad had 2 jobs.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
so-
this is like all the chips were on the table.
Oh my goodness, yeah. And they never really, for them it was just the idea that I was able, I was so passionate about the instrument and about music. The fact that, they enabled me to make that move to London
And believed in you.
Believed in me enough to sort of just let me go, because I'm an only child as well. So I was the only one at
So
home.
it's the last thing they want to see happen is you leave the house.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
yet they knew that was the only way
Yeah.
for you to grow. is
Yeah,
you
I
had
guess
to go
so.
to a
It's a
major
very-
city, right?
Yes. So it was always going to be a major city because I felt like, I had the biggest opportunities were basically in the big cities like London, New York, LA. And London purely because it was close enough that I could still go home a couple of times a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had 2 of my best friends that were moving to London roughly at the same time.
Oh, okay.
So
Were they musicians?
yes, one is a drummer and one is a sound engineer.
Okay.
So we ended up living in a house together in London. And one of my friends and myself, we went and enrolled at a drum college in London, and the other one studied at SAE in
Sure.
London at the time to become a sound engineer.
And so you get to London and it's lean times
Yes.
and you're new in town.
Yeah.
Do you know, besides your roommates who are your best friends,
Yeah.
do you know anyone in the city to kind of start networking and getting some pickup gigs?
No, I basically just used the contacts I made at school. So
okay.
I
So you're going to what school there?
at the time it was called Tech Music Schools. I believe it's operating under a different name at the moment, but
Okay.
it was part of Thames Valley University. It was a music program, and
And this is your new network.
yeah, that
In
was
town.
exactly, and that was sort of, I made a lot of friends there over the course of the first year, and all the people that I went to college with in London, they already knew each other because most of them were from London, and they so they knew where to go, and they knew where the jams were happening, the open mic nights, and so I just started to tag along, and
Which is great insight, right? Because you come into a city that you're new in and you don't have an existing group of friends in that city waiting for you or likewise.
yeah,
And so you find friends or make friends that are established in at least understanding where to go, what to do, where the shows are, et cetera.
Exactly.
And then that is at least the entree to, how do
Absolutely.
I meet other musicians?
correct.
Because it's a very daunting place to start from zero. And most of
Absolutely.
us do start from zero, but that doesn't make it any easier.
No,
Knowing that we're
absolutely.
starting at zero is great awareness, but certainly doesn't do much for, easing the pain. You still have to get out and you have to find the network and to create your own, essentially.
Absolutely. I very quickly realized that the people that were holding the big gigs at the time, it was sort of, I was told that those are the people that they know every producer, they know every engineer in every major studio, they know the management people, they know
They're
all
in
the
the
other
real
players.
network.
Exactly.
They're in the network
Exactly.
of the music business, which is
Correct.
where all of us need to be if that's the business you're going to be in
Exactly. And I was sort of on the outside looking in,
at that time.
at that time, and I, for a guy from Luxembourg to just be in London is phenomenal. There was so much to see every night. There's live music, there's shows, there's jams, there's open mic nights. You can go to Westminster, and
sessions.
there's everything is just happening all the time. As a result, I was following my friends around, and I was introduced to a lot of players via them, and I was starting to get opportunities to just jump up and have a play every now and again, and then
And you're
met
practicing
more.
a lot.
I'm practicing at home, you know, but we didn't have a kit set up at the house. So
So
it
you're
was
practicing on the pad?
all pad work. And then sometimes I would get a room, you know, at college you could put your name down for a room, and you had a drum kit there, so you could play. But yeah, so weeks were basically the days were spent at college, and then the nights were spent going out and seeing shows and, you know, seeing who's who in the scene and stuff.
Thank you for watching and supporting everything Modern Drummer is up to. Hit the subscribe button down below. It means so much to us because we can keep bringing you the best drummers and content all the time. And please check out our shop. We've got Legends books. We've got back issues. We've got swag. Everything the drumming community could want. And it's so exciting to have you guys be the best part of it. Once again, thank you and enjoy the rest of the video. And so what's the first big break that takes you from student trying to network to working?
So the first big break was essentially in 2007. So I've been at college for 2 years. Okay. In 2007, a friend of mine heard about an audition that was happening for an artist at the time, and I got a call to go down and audition for this gig through him.
And what was the gig?
And the gig was with a rapper, UK-based rapper called Example.
Okay.
And
how big a place was Example playing?
So Example at the time, he was signed to a record label that was owned by Mike Skinner from the Streets, who were like a very prominent UK band at the time.
Sure.
And we were playing sort of around the anything between like 800 and 1500 mark.
Okay,
which
so that's
to
a
me
big
was
gig.
like,
no, that's a big, and this would be your first gig, this audition for this.
Yeah.
So what happens at the audition?
So I did the audition, and then and I got the gig. I ended up getting the gig, and I went on tour pretty much less than a month afterwards.
Was the audition? How'd you prepare for the audition? What happened?
This is in 2007. You know, so I was sent,
no social media,
no
really.
social media.
Right. You're still getting CDs and cassettes.
Yeah, exactly. So they sent me over a bunch of material that I listened to and transcribed, and he had a DJ at the time. I'd never worked with a DJ, so there was a lot of segues and a lot of, you know, medleys of certain tunes, and I learned all that. And then we had rehearsals for a couple of days, and then we just rolled out, and it was...
But first you had to get the gig.
I had to get
How'd you get the gig?
Oh, the audition was crazy. It's sort of my first lesson in being a session player in anywhere, really, not just London. But we did 15 or 20 minutes of playing. We played like maybe 4 or 5 songs, and we talked for about an hour. And
you an Example?
Yes.
Okay.
And at the end of that, he was like, "You've got the playing part down, and you seem like, you know, like a good guy. So the gig's yours if you want it." And at
right
that
there
time,
on the spot.
Yeah, right there on the spot, he offered me the gig. And what I didn't know at the time, which in hindsight, looking back, is that he based his decision a lot more on the social interaction he had with me than the playing. Because the playing wasn't that difficult. It was, you know, it was just hip hop beats, very simple. Don't play too many fills, just hold the beat down, and especially with the DJ there as well, you know, so there was like a lot of
rhythm happening.
Exactly.
Right. So you really had to know your place musically.
Exactly. And I loved it. It was a great setup. We had a great couple of tours, and that was sort of my first taste of
when did
touring.
you learn that it was the chat that you had that got you the gig more than it was the playing? The playing has to be there.
Yes.
But the personality was what put it over the top and and inclined him to offer it to you on the spot.
Yeah.
When did you learn that?
He told me that. He told me himself. He was like, they auditioned, I don't know how many drummers it were, but every drummer that came in was well prepared, like myself, and every drummer played well. So he said that the only way he was able to really distinguish players from each other was by having a chat with them. And also the other thing that I now know, having done this for 20 years now pretty much, is that artists especially like to surround themselves with good people, because even at this stage, we're here now, you know, we're playing tonight, it'll be about 2 hours of music tonight pretty much. There's still 22 hours in the day where you're not playing.
That you're in Sting's world.
Exactly.
Right.
So it's almost more important, the social aspect of touring, than the playing aspect. A lot of people sometimes neglect that, or not. They sometimes don't even know that, you know, that how important the social side is.
Did you know it at the time when you
No,
met Example?
no. I was.
You were
sat
just
at
being
home.
you.
I was being myself, but also I was sitting at home. I was practicing 4 or 5 hours a day, you know, just trying, because I thought in order to get a gig, I have to be the best player.
Right.
And that is true to a certain extent, where you have to.
You have to.
You have to meet the mark in order to be considered for a certain gig. You have to have your basics down. You have to be able to play at an open level, you know, where you don't want to think about what you're playing.
But with Example, it happened naturally.
It happened very naturally. And I had no idea about the music industry at the time. You know, I just found it interesting that, you know, I was so well prepared. I was so nervous, and I played reasonably well. But then he very quickly sort of deferred to just having a chat over playing more. But I had loads more songs that I'd prepared.
Right.
So I was,
Right.
and then
other young men would say, Example, I love talking to you, but can I show you these other songs? Right? The whole thing just blows up in the moment. But no, you went with it.
I just went with it because
Did you learn that from your dad? Was he very not only likable but adaptable to? Since even though he wasn't a professional musician, he was an active musician.
Yes.
And he was playing all the time. So clearly he was interacting with people all the time.
Sure.
In hindsight, maybe, did you learn some of that from him?
I mean, not that I know, but at the same time, I would have had to. Otherwise, I wouldn't know where it was coming from. You know what I mean? But like, I think you just, in those sort of moments in the room, you just have to be able to read the room. You have to know like who you're dealing with, what you're doing, and how to, and when you read the room, you know exactly what you're doing in terms of like whether you go with the conversation or you interrupt the conversation, or, you know, and that's something that's really hard to teach.
No,
you know
it
what
is.
I mean?
I call it less is more, though.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you're going to err on the side of, as counterintuitive as it sounds, because if we're talking about, be likable and be someone people want to be around, you think, okay, well, that means that, you know, I'm talking and I care, and all those things are true. But the interesting thing is in the music business is I found that more often than not, it's not how much you say, it's what and when you say it.
Totally.
So listening is actually a much more valuable skill than talking.
I completely agree with you, 100%. Because even when we were talking after the audition, most of what I did was listen. You know what I mean? He was doing most of the talking. And I was just, you hit the nail on the head.
But that's what it's about. And
Absolutely.
It's genuine. You know, the one thing I want to share with our community is that it's not a tact to manipulate anybody or be somebody you're not or any of that stuff. It's genuine. And if you really, now I'm not saying it's not a skill some people have to learn as opposed to either born with or pick up in their youth so it becomes ingrained in their personality or any of that. I'm not saying that how you get it. I'm just saying that what's important is that at some point you do get a genuine interest in other people's lives and hearing about them and caring and whatever you can contribute back, great. A lot of times just the ear that you lent to Example was enough for him to say, okay, because I remember a very famous manager who's a dear friend and collaborator of mine for decades, said to me, and I learned this stayed with me forever. He said, when I'm talking to someone we're auditioning for a band or for a tour, it's, you know, it could be on the tour personnel side, it's not just musicians. the main thing I think about in interacting in this moment of the audition, because sometimes audition interactions can be just seconds or minutes,
For sure.
is can I envision myself on the road for X amount of months or years with this person?
Exactly,
That's
yeah.
all that's going through their head. It's not musical for a second.
Yeah.
Not to say that if they didn't have the musical side, they would get the gig, because they wouldn't. But once the musical thing is sorted, the only thing everybody's thinking about in their heads, whether they say it or not, is can I stand this person?
100%, Ed.
And
100%.
and so that worked with Example. So you go out
Yeah.
with Example, and you tour with him for how long?
I only toured with him between 2007 and 2008. And then...
But it was continuous for
continuous.
almost a
It
year?
was continuous for the better part of that year, to the point where I actually took a break from college.
Okay.
Because the college was very supportive in that sense.
Oh, great.
So as soon as
They
they
wanted
knew,
you to have a gig.
exactly.
Okay.
As soon as they realized that I had a gig that was a touring gig, they offered me time off, time away from the college. I was able to take my exams later. And
What was the
2007
biggest lesson you take from that first tour? What was the biggest eye-opening lesson that you still to this day have learned and applied?
That's a great question. The biggest lesson that I still apply, that I learned, not necessarily that I learned that on that tour, but it became very apparent that that rule is the golden rule, which is always be on time. Always be on time. 20 minutes or 15 minutes early is on time.
That's right.
On time is late, and late is unacceptable. So
And late can cost you a gig.
absolutely,
No question.
100%.
I say if you're not early, you're late.
That's right. That's right.
So that was a big...
That was a big.
Did you already have that, or were you always someone who waited till the last minute and ran late? 'Cause you
No.
don't strike me as someone who does that.
No,
So,
no.
but did you then?
No, absolutely no. That's definitely something I did get from my dad, is
Okay.
the sort of
He was on it.
OCD nature of being punctual. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
great. And hence his gigs, he never had any issues with
No,
gigs.
absolutely.
As opposed, which when you have timing problems of lateness, that's a big problem.
Yes.
So that was a big one. So you come out of Example. Now, do you go back to university after your break?
I did go back to university really briefly. Although coming off that tour, I felt invincible. I felt like I've made it. I've come to London from Luxembourg. I've been on a tour bus. I'm now a touring musician, and I was.
It's a big adjustment.
It's
seeing fans every night.
Yeah, exactly.
And that whole world
Exactly.
of managers and agents and sound checks and
Totally.
and screaming
Totally.
fans
For the first
It's-
time for me as well, you know.
Exactly. I mean, it's hard the 10th time, but the first time,
Yeah,
you really have to keep your feet on the ground,
absolutely.
and it's hard.
It's very hard, and I sort of got, a little bit carried away with the idea that I was a working musician in London after 2 years, and goes on tour once and completely loses track of who he is, what he does.
Okay.
So,
Which we all do. It happens
Absolutely.
to all of us. How did
Yeah.
you recover from that and
That
not
was-
either get a bad addiction or
that
blow
was-
the next gig or all the things
Totally.
that
Yeah, yeah,
everyone
yeah.
seems to do, because that's part of the journey. It's not a criticism and it's not
Absolutely.
a problem in the sense that, oh, how or why did you do that? All of us have the left turns that
Totally.
that you have some point have to learn from.
Yeah.
You better anyway, or
Yeah.
it'll a left turn that lasts forever is called
Yeah.
a career ender. So what happened? What'd you do?
That was the second big lesson in the music industry, especially as a session player, is that there's never a guarantee, and you can never rest on your laurels of what happened on the last gig, because every gig comes to an end.
So
whether
what
you
was
want
there
it
a
or
slap
not.
in the face moment?
Huge.
Oh, what was it?
huge. It was the phone didn't ring after that tour.
Oh, I
Yeah.
see. So the
Yeah, yeah.
momentum that you felt inside, you thought would carry on to
Totally,
collaborations.
exactly.
But Example was off tour and no one else was calling.
Nothing.
Okay.
And why would they? No one knew my name.
Right,
No one
of
knew
course,
who I was.
of course. No, you
I
were
was
still
a kid
very
out of
early
school.
in your
yeah,
career.
Exactly.
But you had to learn that.
I had to learn that, and I had to learn that the hard way, because, like you say, like the momentum and the sort of the adrenaline you feel on stage
of course.
and on the road, just to come back home, I thought that naturally that was my big break. And now it's just going to be continuous work until the end of my career.
Yeah.
And I didn't know
Yeah.
that the nature was like, well, after you finish a gig, you start again.
Right.
You might know a few more people, and your net might be a little bit wider, but you still have to go back out and get a gig. You know, audition again, go to gigs, go to jams, like all this stuff. So, and like you said, this is pre-social media, so there was MySpace. So I guess that is considered social media.
Yeah, that's the beginning.
The beginning. So there was MySpace and.
So what did you do when you realized, like, wait a second, this is not, the momentum has stopped.
Yes.
I have to go out and do what I did to get example.
Yeah.
I've got to get another gig.
I went back to school. I went out, did the same thing as I did before. Dusted myself down, sort of thing, because that was a harsh awakening in a way for like a 21-year-old who just moved.
Of course, you're still learning life. Never mind the music business.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
And yeah. So then I went back to school and I continued just doing what I do. Tried to stay positive, meet new people, as many people as possible. And then the occasional, like recording session would pop up, and I was playing around town, in like little setups, like, whether it was like in restaurants or bars or pubs or.
And what's the next big gig? When does it come back around and you get another big gig?
So the next big gig is basically, there was a record company called Communion Records, who are still a record company. They're now called Communion One. Okay. But at the time they were just called Communion Records, and it was set up by a couple of artists, musicians, and a producer. And that record company, I was friends with a bunch of the musicians, one of which is actually the piano player in Mumford and Sons, who started it. Oh. But this is way before any of that. Okay. So,
but that's the origin.
That's the origin.
Because you end up playing with Mumford and Sons, right?
Yes, yes. And we met. There was this one night in London that was really famous at the time, and it was called Communion because it was started by a producer called Ian Grimble in the UK, in London. Okay. And he came up with Communion, which was in Notting Hill, and it was a platform for new folk artists and, sort of folk singer-songwriter artists. And it was every first Sunday of the month, hence the name Communion, Sunday Communion. And we would always go there, and I would suddenly meet all the people, and suddenly when there was an artist who didn't have a drummer, they would call me because they knew me from that one night.
Oh, wow. So that was a very powerful networking event.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that event sort of helped me to then get from going back to college to meeting enough people, producers, even people that worked in management, to suddenly I was sort of like, I became the go-to guy in that scene. And I recorded with a lot of people, with Ian Grimble as a producer, because he was producing a lot of these artists at the same time. And we're talking Laura Marling and early days Mumford and Sons, Michael Kiwanuka, Noah and the Whale. Like all of these bands were like, came out of that same basement in Notting Hill,
and Mumford and Sons ends up being this huge band.
Yeah.
And they kind of are self-contained in drumming until the third record.
Yes.
Right? And then what happens? How does that lead to your collaboration?
So the first two records are obviously huge. They win the Grammys. They go from that basement essentially to being an arena-filling band very, very quickly. They go like, and so then when the third record comes out, they change up the sound, and the sound evolves into a more electronic-based sound. Electronic meaning electric guitars. They move away from the acoustic guitars. They move away from banjo towards more electric guitars. Okay. And up to that point, Marcus Mumford, who is the lead singer in the band, he was covering all the rhythmic elements of the music by playing a kick drum and a tambourine at the front of the stage whilst playing guitar. So they never needed a drummer. And the odd occasion where he would need a drummer, he would play himself and sing at the same time.
And is your friend in the band, the piano
He's
player?
still in the band.
Okay,
He's
so
still in the
he's
band.
with them even with
Yes.
the first two albums.
Absolutely.
So then they get to the third album. It's electronic, and it's a much heavier lift for drumming.
Exactly. So then I realized quickly that there's a talk around town that Mumford and Sons are going back out, but there is drums on the record for the first time. It's a full drums like record on every track, and so naturally I call up a few people and I see whether they're holding auditions. I then find out that there are auditions, and they've already like picked a bunch of names into a hat, and mine's one of them, which I'm already like super happy about, and because I was still friends with those guys from way back when,
From
but
the
obviously
Communion days.
exactly. But at the same time, their sort of rise to fame, you know, we lost touch a bit over the course of the years where they were touring the previous records. And I was on the road with an artist called Matt Corby, Australian artist. We were touring Australia quite extensively at the time, and I was having a lot of fun with him. And when I got the call from Mumford's management asking me if I wanted the gig, that was obviously that's like,
You said yes?
Straight away, yeah.
And then you ended up playing with them for years.
9 years.
9 years. And then here we are today. You're playing with Sting. As the story is told, you did some pickup gigs with Sting.
Yeah.
And then how do you end up here today in Sting 3.0?
So that was, so like you mentioned, there was a couple of gigs where in 2021, I was put in touch with Martin Kirschenbaum, who's Sting's manager, via another manager I knew, who was looking for a drummer who's London-based. This is 21, so we're still in COVID. The restrictions are just about lifting, but there was no crowds inside of venues yet, and we did a Jules Holland performance as part of promo for his then new record, which was called The Bridge. And so we played 2 songs on this show, and I got that gig. I obviously, lost my mind at the idea of playing with Sting. That's crazy. So we played those 2 songs. He was very happy with the result, and then I didn't hear back from them for 2 years. I went back to touring with Mumford and Sons. I then joined amazing American artist called Maggie Rogers. I toured with her for just about a year, and then during my time with Maggie, Martin Kirschenbaum, Sting's manager, saw us play a gig in Chicago for Lollapalooza in Chicago, and he texted me afterwards, and he said he really enjoyed the performance, that we should have a chat and catch up. And so, long story short, we ended up meeting on the phone. We basically had a phone conversation, and he said there's a gig that they're trying to do, but the drummer, Zach Jones at the time, great drummer, couldn't do the gig. So whether I was able to jump in and cover the gig for him. And Zach was like incredible. He helped me like prepare the gig because there was no rehearsals. So, and I'd never done a full show with Sting. So I basically started prepping a set from a desk mix that they sent me. And then Zach helped me. And so then I flew out to Miami, did the show. And then again, I thought I did all right, but nothing happened afterwards until a few weeks later, I get a call, and they're telling me that the Sting wants to have a conversation, a chat with me about something else. And that's when I went and met him, and he pitched the idea to me of this new
Concept.
sort of scaled down concept of 3.0, which is his first time back as a trio since The Police.
Oh, amazing. And how's it going? How's it?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. You know, it's.
How many shows have you guys done so far as we film this?
So right now we did 2 months in Europe
Okay.
from May until July, and then we had a month off, which was the month of August, and then I left home on September 6th to come to America, and we started the tour, and today is
October
20th. So, and we still got about 3 weeks left. So we're here until November, I think 19th or 18th.
And you love it. It's lived up to the in your head.
Yeah.
Like playing with Sting is it's more amazing even experiencing it.
Yeah, it's honestly it's a very, very, very steep learning curve. Just how smart he is, how fast he thinks on stage. Mm-hmm. Every day we do an hour-long sound check
with him.
He's usually early,
mm-hmm.
and and we do an hour-long sound check where we play through a couple of songs that he might want to rearrange, whether that's rhythmically or harmonically, or he might want to try a song that he hasn't played for a very long time. He also lets Dominic, who's like his, closest, the person closest to him when it comes to music. He's been with him for 35 years. So Dominic brings in songs every day that we haven't played yet to work on those. And then the set list changes, So we currently have like, I would say a repertoire of about 50 songs that we pick from for a show that usually has 20. So you have to be ready for you have to be on all the time, and it's incredibly rewarding. He's a very, very gracious man, and I strive every day to get better and especially as a 3-piece, there's so much space. Right. There's no place to hide.
And he encourages you to go out on a limb and take it as far as you can.
Absolutely.
Almost a jazz approach,
right,
in that regard.
Absolutely. Right. It's sort of a jazz approach. I always say like he's a jazzer in his head, but he's a punk at heart, So it's like,
and that's where then
those
the
two
fusion
exactly
is rock.
That's it. That's the police. It's essentially that, Like if you listen to those old records, and then even all of his solo stuff, there's just so much to pick from. Like it's an incredible array of songs, and he's very adamant that we take risks. He loves the element of risk, and he thinks of these songs that he's played over the course of the last 40 years. He thinks of them as like living organisms that constantly evolve and constantly change. So prepping for this gig was impossible, because when you go back all the way to Stuart, and then you go to Vinny and Omar, and then Vinny, and then Manu, and Vinny again, and Abe, and it's like I said before, it's like the Mount Rushmore of drummers. It's the Olymp. It's incredible, and they all brought so much to this gig in terms of sound, in terms of parts, and
you have to capture that. So the essence of what people are familiar with and what the music as recorded and created is or was, yet put a twist.
Exactly. So that's the hard part, really. The hard part is to capture the songs in the way that I think is right by the drummer who essentially played on the record.
Yeah, they created the parts.
Exactly. And so I want to do right by them, but then I also want to do my own thing, because he's very adamant that I play it the way I want to play it. So when I first came on the gig, I had prepped all these songs, and I knew pretty much every fill. Like people like Vinny and Manu and Omar, like those are some of my Stuart. Those are some of my favorite drummers of all time. I basically ended up like learning the music as it was, but I didn't know at the time that that's the last thing he wants you to do, is to play a Police song like Stuart. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. He wants you to play like you, but honor Stuart's parts but he wants to be surprised on stage. So every night you have to throw in different bits and try and risk, go on a limb here and try something, and it's fascinating. It's the first gig like this I've ever been a part of.
Right.
And
you think about it, it's a pop rock gig in the sense of commercially huge.
Yeah.
But yet you're playing like a jazz artist, like
Yeah.
Miles Davis,
Yeah,
someone where
absolutely.
every night you've got to have variation. The
Exactly.
opposite of how pop is done.
Totally.
Whereas you're playing with these
Totally.
other artists you've mentioned, and typically it's like, hey, we've got to make sure we deliver exactly what people expect.
Exactly.
And exactly what was on the record. And here you are prepared for that, but Sting saying, don't play it exactly like the record. Play it close enough that it honors the record.
Exactly.
But different enough that it's you.
That's exactly right. When I understood that, and when I finally realized that, when I went back and I looked at all the videos from all the different eras of drummers, you know, whether it was Zach or Josh Freese before that, or then Vinny, he was there like, you know, a couple of times, and you can't find the same song played the same way twice over the course of the last 40 years.
I see. So
And
his
I was
approach is
I was
is
like, I see what's
consistently
going
that.
on there, yeah.
I see.
And then when I started, you know, we had very few days of rehearsal for this tour. And Dominic has been sort of my guiding light in all of this, because he's really been teaching me the ways, you know, of this gig.
Right.
And then, and he said to me, he was like, you'll never get comfortable, because you'll never let you get comfortable, because that's the whole point of the gig, is to stay alert, to stay fresh, keep the music as fresh as possible.
Don't ever get stale.
Exactly.
Because comfortable equals stale.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
And
it sounds like the gig is working out great. And you're loving it,
I'm
to
having
say
so
the
much
least.
fun. I'm having so much
And congratulations
Thank you so
on
much, David.
being the drummer with Sting and Sting 3.0. And thank you for taking the time today.
Mate, anytime. Thank
Thank
you so
you,
much,
Chris.
David. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Chris Maas on tour with Sting. I'm David Frangioni. Please check out Chris's rundown where we go through his entire Ludwig Sabian rig. It's awesome. It sounds incredible. The band sounds incredible. Everybody check out Chris on tour. I'm David Frangioni. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button below, please. And that's how we get to bring you the world's greatest drummers. And we'll see you again.